Aloha, Comic Watchers. Cody and Nick coming at you with a special Comic Watchers Presents, where we've got comic book royalty Emma Kubert with us to talk about her image book, Inkblot #1. Hi, Emma, how are you? Thank you for joining us.
I'm doing good. Thank you for having me.
So, Nick, you were the reviewer on the book. Do you want to preface it a little bit? And then, Emma, would you like to talk about it a bit?
Yeah, definitely. Like
go for it.
Totally. It's a pretty magnificent story to kind of summarize like that. But you have basically what's centered around a magic cat. And there's a world that's happening that's full of different realms that the seeker who comes into contact with this cat is thrust into a pretty magical story. And it kicks things off where we don't really know what's going on. Emma, how did this come about and kind of where did this idea come from?
So basically it came from two things. My love of cats. When I was, a kid, I had a black cat that was my best friend. And then, and then my love of fantasy. I mean, growing up, I actually didn't really take to comic books a lot, especially since basically what I saw was either superhero comics or, like Cartoon Network kind of comics. They were just very cartoony. And so me, being like a 10-year-old girl who wasn't really into the big muscly men saving the world, I took more to animation and I took more to a lot of fantasy genres, especially, growing up with Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, all that kind of stuff. So when I got the chance to really start creating my own concept, especially in school, at the Kubert school where I went, they encourage with a lot of assignments. They keep them open enough so that you can create your own stories. And so when I was trying to come up with my own story, I knew it had to be something fantasy and it had to be something a bit more epic, just because that was the kind of inspiration and the kind of stories that I was into my entire life.
Anytime Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings gets mentioned, I'm so in.
I know, me too. It really is, like, it draws me in because those are my favorite things. And it's not even just that, it's stuff that's more recent as well, like Gravity Falls and Stranger Things goes into this too. And it's very much just inspired by a lot of good young adult kind of content that I grew up with and that I experienced and loved, all in one thing. So it's kind of like a mishmash of so many different things that it makes it original, I guess.
So, kind of on that high fantasy idea, the main character, the seeker, and this cat comes from, she's falling asleep and she spills this inkwell.
Yeah.
And it manifests itself. Like, it had me thinking, my background's in narratology and in literary analysis and studies. So it had me thinking about, like, narrative world building from, like, the David Herman essays, where he talks about, like, the nexus between narrative and the mind, where you're creating these spaces, you're creating these worlds, you're almost like playing God to an entire universe as you construct these worlds, as you're creating this art. And I just wanted to know, kind of like, is that an intentional thing? Because it feels super intentional to me.
I have to tell you guys that every single thing that goes into each issue of Inkblot is intentional. Like, every single thing that I, decide what to draw or what I decide, little clues, it's all intentional and it all goes with the overall story. And this is just the beginning. So that's kind of like, that's what's really interesting. I mean, just like about an hour ago, Rusty and I, we were talking about the ending of the whole thing of Inkblot, like our whole entire story. And we were just kind of like, we could totally tell this story like over years and years and years of just issues, because it's just so big, the world that we created, and we have so many different things that we want to do with it. So we're just so excited that a lot of people like it. And hopefully it can keep going,
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's something that I'm immediately a fan of, and it ties right into that Lord of the Rings fandom and being like a lore hound. So anything that feels like it has all this lore that you can dive into, that's
It,
something that I immediately latch onto.
it really does. And the fact, because to me, I mean, I've never really totally seen that in a comic. I mean, most of the time in comics, when in their ongoing series, you see like a premise and then you see like the characters take you through a lot of ideas. I never really see so much history packed into a story. So it's kind of exciting to add that to our little world that we created, especially through comics, because it is such a cinematic way of telling a story that you're basically like reading a TV show right now, and you get an episode a month. Like that's basically what it's like, and that's how I like it. That's how I like a comic. It's like I'm reading a TV show.
Yeah.
You mentioned your dad calling the book Inksplat or whatever it is that he's doing. Do you find yourself? I mean, you obviously. I guess we got to mention it. You know, your dad is pretty well known in the comic community, as your grandfather and your uncle and your older cousin.
Yeah,
so
definitely Katie Kubert.
So I wonder, like, how much do you interact with your family when you're creating something like this? Like, is this something that you're going to dad or going to uncle and bouncing ideas off of, or is Katie your person, or is it just you and Rusty?
I would say the story is very much just me and Rusty coming up with the story itself. It's really just me and Rusty going back and forth and talking about, you know, all the different things that we like and all the things that we can put into it and everything, and just piecing everything together is just between the two of us. But with the actual physical drawing, storytelling, the visual of it all, I always go to my dad. I always show him like almost everything. I mean, as long as he's not busy or anything, I try to go to him, and he sometimes comes to me and was like, "What are you working on?" And I'm like, "This." And then sometimes it's back and forth. I'm like, "What are you working on?" And he's like, "Batman." And I'm like, "Of course." So and I mean, we live in California right now, so my uncle, he lives on the East Coast, but when I was in school, he taught us as well, so I'd go to him for other things like homework assignments. Not right now. But yeah, I mean, I think being an artist and being in a family of artists, you can never, like, we want our product to be the best it can be, so why not go to the pros and ask for their opinions, right? I mean, that's what you want. You want it to be great. And so if you already have a great artist right next to you, might as well get his opinion on that, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that craft really comes through in Inkblot too. It's kind of a visual powerhouse, really, just page after page. And
Yeah.
I wanted to see kind of what that collaboration was like with Rusty and how it impacted the actual artwork that we see in the end result.
Well, basically what would happen is that Rusty and I, we would talk about basically the whole arc as a whole. And maybe we'll write down like 6 different Post-it notes of like a sentence on each for each issue. And then I'll take that Post-it note and I will lay out 20 pages and I'll pencil 20 pages. But most of the time, after, like, during that, Rusty and I will always go back and forth. Like, if I drew a page, he'll check it. And then after I pencil everything, he inks it. And that's basically what he does. I have the same mug, by the way. That cat, I have the same one.
Yes, no way. Oh my God. Yes. We came prepared for this.
That was good intermission.
Yes. So cool.
Oh my God, amazing. Okay. Anyway, so he'll take my pencils and he'll ink it. So what he does is he really tightens everything up and adds a lot of detail to it. Like all of those textures that you see in it, that's all Rusty. So it's very much between the two of us a collaboration of art. Like I couldn't ink the way he inks, and he couldn't pencil the way I pencil. So it's kind of a very much like you are seeing a total collaboration between the two of us. And then after he inks it, I color it. So it's back to me checking his inks. And then he takes the final product and while he's lettering it, he's writing the dialogue. So he's the one who letters it and writes all the dialogue in there. So it's really like, as we're going back and forth, we're constantly checking each other's work back and forth. And it's totally just us two putting out our work to the world.
That's really cool. That's a cool process that you don't really hear a lot.
Yeah, and also his desk is right there, so it works really well.
That's pretty nice.
So it's easy to just go back and forth. He does get annoyed when I look over his shoulder as he's inking, and I'm just like, you messed up a little bit. He's like, no, wait until it's finished. And I'm the same way. It's okay. I'm like, don't hover.
Right.
But I would say it's just a completely collaborative effort. I mean, even when coming up with the idea of Inkblot, I started coming up with the concept when I was in school, but it really didn't manifest until years later. And Rusty and I, we did a Kickstarter called Willowbrook, which is kind of, there's little bits and parts of Willowbrook that kind of went into Inkblot. So it's kind of like I took what my previous little project was, and then his ideas of like very high fantasy, like Lord of the Rings stuff and Wheel of Time and all Game of Thrones too, and just putting it in there with my kind of YA type of style. And it really just, the idea itself is very collaborative. Even though I started it, it wouldn't be Inkblot without the two of us together doing it, which is really cool.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that is really cool. Like that's such a unique collaborative process. We hear about the, the, what do you call it? Assembly line version of putting together comics all the time. And then you see like some of the indies that'll do everything themselves, but to see the way you two play off of each other, and it really shines in the book. Like it's just so unique.
Yeah, I mean, I think I kind of like it this way, especially for my own idea, just because, I like having the creative type of control. Like we don't even really have an editor. And I think the only thing we really outsourced was like flatting for colors. So it wasn't really like it was really just the two of us doing it. And I mean, yeah. I mean, the assembly line is cool. I really do like the collaboration. I like talking to creators and getting ideas from each other. And I think that should happen more often in comics. I feel like, a lot of the teams that they hire, they should really just talk to each other and come up with something very collaborative and very together, I guess.
Well, yeah, I totally agree with you there. So you spent the last couple of years at DC. Doing like Teen Titans Go and DC Superhero Girls, Raven, stuff like that. Now that you've kind of been able to, I don't want to say cast off the shackles, but I mean cast off the shackles of the main two and established characters and create your own. Like, do you see yourself going back to mainstream comics, or do you kind of see yourself more as living in this indie creator space?
I can see myself doing both. Just because, I mean, going through school, as I said before, I wasn't really a big fan of comics growing up. I mean, I really didn't like comics until I did. I didn't really like comics just because it just didn't feel very inclusive to me. But I always loved art. I always wanted to go for art. And then I went to Savannah College of Art and Design for animation. And so going there, it was realizing animation wasn't really for me. I liked the skills that went into it, but I really wanted more creative control. I wanted to learn more about actually drawing. things. So I went back to the Kubert school. I dropped out and then I went to the Kubert school. And that's really where I kind of learned how to draw. And the reason why I did that was because I did an internship at DC. It was only the manufacturing floor where I interned, which was really exciting just because you get to see the final works of all the comics before they go to print. And so they had me correct a giant omnibus of Amanda Connor and Jimmy Palmiotti's Harley Quinn. And this was when Harley Quinn was getting really famous because she was, you know, like an anti-hero, crazy female character that's a little relatable, kind of, you know, like, and so that was really the first moment where I was like, okay, wait, like superhero comics, they're kind of cool. No, I'm kidding. Right. But no, I really like, I enjoyed that there was an actual title character that was silly and weird and funny and female and different than just the standard superhero. So I got really excited about it, and I realized that comics were more for me. But going through school, I mean, I would switch back and forth. I would be like, yeah, I want to do creator-owned, or yeah, I want to do superheroes. And I mean, I would love one day to do Batgirl or Superman, but we'll see. Or Thor, but we'll see one day.
Or maybe Harley Quinn.
Harley Quinn would be cool too. But it was really just like, it was kind of just a door that opened in my mind where I was like, comics can be anything that I want it to be. It's just another form of storytelling. So going into it, I started out wanting to do more superheroes, but then if you have an opportunity to pitch your own creator-owned idea, then yeah, I'm going to do that. And it's going to be awesome.
Yes. I love that. And I'd love to kind of dig in a little bit to that love of comics, because I was somewhat of a late bloomer myself, I guess. It was towards the end of high school that I actually started getting into them, and I was introduced to comics through digital comics on the Marvel Unlimited app. And I know Cody here is quite the opposite. He's got quite an extensive history with comics. And that's something I'm really interested in, how people get into them and everything. But also, you know, what did you start reading that helped you influence Inkblot as you were falling in love with comics simultaneously?
Honestly, I wasn't really reading a lot of comics. While I was going through school, it was more just things that I was watching and things from my youth. And I haven't really read a lot of fantasy comics. I mean, I didn't really know that there were so many. I mean, I honestly, like, I was mostly exposed to superhero stuff growing up, so that's all I thought comics really were. So when I was in school, that's kind of when I started reading a bit more Image comics like Saga and Paper Girls and all that kind of stuff. But that was kind of like my look into, like, I can do an other genre that's not superheroes, but I can do it any way that I want. And what's my favorite thing? I love fantasy and I like cats and witches. So yeah, let's do that. You know, it's just having that opportunity and that freedom to really do whatever you want with this storytelling form. And you really can do whatever you want, you know, especially if it's fantasy.
It's true.
One, Nick, don't think I missed the fact that you just called me old.
Ooh,
I heard that. I caught it. All right. Noted. So obviously, comics has been a fairly male-dominated industry for a very long time, and that's changing.
Yeah.
Just look at the Eisners from this
Definitely.
year. It's very clearly, obviously changing. But it still is very male-heavy, male-centric. So I kind of wanted to ask, like, how has that been for you? How's the journey been? Like, this has been a wild year for comics in that regard. To be quite
honest, I don't really feel it as much as other people do, and it's mostly because I think when I look at how people see me, I feel like they don't really see a woman in comics. They more see a Kubert. So it's like I can't really say, what it's like to be a woman in comics, just because I feel like most people in comics don't really see that. They more see just the name Kubert, and then they see the work, and they like Inkblot, hopefully. So, I mean, it hasn't, I think just the fact that, a lot of the social movements is affecting all sorts of entertainment is a great thing. Representation definitely matters. And that's kind of why I like to include all different types of characters in my stories. I mean, I think that's the biggest thing, is that as a creator, you have to learn how to create all kinds of characters and all kinds of stories, because you never know who's going to be reading, you never know who's going to be watching you. So it's kind of like you want to put your best foot forward and make it count and have everyone involved. And that's with me. I mean, I remember I would be saying in interviews how the main thing, the kind of stories that I want to write and I want to create, are stories that my 13-year-old self would read. So it's kind of like Inkblot. My 13-year-old self would like eat up Inkblot in a second. They would love it. So it's really, I think the biggest thing with all of the movements happening nowadays is that now people have more of a chance to tell their own stories and more creative stories, more representation, which creates more interesting stories anyway. So, I mean, I think it's all a good thing. I think people can still love superheroes, but people can love other things as well. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting, kind of the creators that we've talked to who have come across that something of a revelation. And, this is what comics are too. Like, I really love this. It's not just superheroes. It's a lot bigger than this.
Yeah, that's kind of what I've thought, like, for the past couple years, where it's just, you think of indie comics as like the other, but they're actually really interesting, because it also seems like a lot of creators are telling stories that they've always wanted to tell. So it seems like they're more passionate about it, and they want to do it because this is their story that they want to tell the world. And that can come from anywhere. It can come from anywhere in the world, any person, any gender, any orientation, anyone. I think it's just more interesting to be more inclusive. That's my opinion.
Amazing. Yeah, I love it.
So obviously, you've got the family that provide mentorship, but I wanted to hear, like, who else in the industry do you seek out for mentorship? Who are you talking to? Who are those connections? Who are those mentors?
Well, I would say a lot of the teachers at the Kubert School also served as big mentors. I mean, also a big thing that I grew up with too is that I grew up in New Jersey, and who also was there were the Mandrakes, Tom Mandrake, Jan Duursema, their family. They literally lived right down the street from us. And like me and my brother were best friends with their children, and it was like a whole family thing. So kind of growing up in an environment where you have Tom Mandrake, Jan Duursema, you have my dad, you have my grandpa, my uncle, and then you have the whole school, which also has all the teachers there, and it's a very supportive environment. And it's very, very, it's amazing to be able to go to really anyone and seek out advice or seek out, critiques or anything. I think the biggest thing for me is just I have to learn, kind of which direction I like to go in. like what you learn as you mature as an artist is that everyone has their own way of doing things. And it's just kind of a matter of what way do you want to do it. And some, you know, some teachers will be complete opposites, and I'll be like, I don't know who to listen to. So, I mean, that was great. But also, while I was going through school, my dad was working on Dark Knight 3. And this gave me a chance to, and him a chance to really learn, you know, a different way of drawing. I mean, the way that my dad learned to draw a bit simpler and clear storytelling and negative space was really something that I learned while I was going through school, because he was learning it right at the same time from Frank Miller. So it was kind of like, as he was learning, I was learning too, and that was a huge influence. A lot of Frank Miller's work and was a big help. And even going to conventions and being able to talk to Frank Miller, Brian Azzarello, Klaus Janson, it was really just like, I would ask questions, of course. I'd be like, I need advice. So they were really helpful. Even just in that one conversation, I just learned a lot from them. And it was really great because they're geniuses.
Absolutely. And that's something, you know, you've been able to like consult with all these professionals and just great people in the industry. You've got this source of knowledge behind, and all of the collaboration with Rusty, and you finally get to tell your own story with Inkblot. Does it feel kind of like a weight off your shoulders with #1 releasing? And, you know, what are you most excited for next now that the first issue's out?
I would say, yes, it was a very big relief. And it was a relief to hear that a lot of people like it. So I was okay with that.
Yes.
And now I'm just kind of like, oh, I hope they like issue 2, okay? You know, because for our story, you know, the cat jumps through time and space and worlds and stuff. So each issue is a different story with different characters and everything. But I think you'll like it.
I think so too. And I don't want to get too far into spoiler territory.
No, I
but
won't spoiler.
No, is there
spoiler.
anything you can tell us that, you know, maybe would give some insight as to what's to come that we should be getting excited for?
Elves.
Oh, that's enough. That's it. I'm in. I'm so here.
One word.
Yeah, that's all that's needed too. I mean, it really is.
But when you see the cover, you'll see also a big spoiler for that too. But
Right.
but I will say, I mean, with Inkblot off, it's not entirely off my shoulders, just because I really want it to be an ongoing series, and I want people to keep following along with this epic tale that Rusty and I conjured that can be told through a lot of different issues. And I think the main, I mean, the main thing for me is that I just want it to keep going, I guess. But other projects, I mean, I'm working on a Kickstarter for is he frozen?
Cody, are you still with us? It looks like he is having some technical difficulties.
Okay.
Oh, there he is.
All right. Should we start that question over then?
Yeah, he was distractingly frozen. Your mic is muted.
Sorry about that. I didn't realize that if I wasn't looking at the screen directly, that it would freeze me like that.
Interesting.
Good to know.
Okay, what was the question again? I lost it.
We had pretty much wrapped up like what's coming ahead and what we're looking forward to.
What's coming ahead is that I'm working on a Kickstarter, and that will be more announced around the issue 2 that's coming out with Inkblot. But I mean, what I have in the works is that I just want to tell more creative stories and just work on more comics. We'll see what happens. I mean, this is the beginning, so why not see where it goes?
Absolutely. And we're all so excited for Inkblot. It came up in our reviews, and it was a book that pretty immediately was like, y'all got to check this out. It was one that, like, and now we're talking about it in our chats and just really excited for it. So really just thank you, because it's awesome.
I'm happy to hear that. I think I'm so happy that a lot of different like people like it. It's a story that's meant for everyone. I want all ages, all genders, all people to like this story, because I found that that's the same with the fantasy genre, is that it's for everyone, you know? So yeah. I'm glad you guys like it.
Absolutely. So don't want to keep you too long, but we do like to sort of wrap up with a little bit of discussion on, what the creators have been reading and what they're looking forward to in the industry, because that's what we do a lot here at Comic Watch, and we love to get y'all's opinions.
Let me think. I mean, honestly, I don't really read a lot of comics that are more current. I actually read a lot of older comics.
That's right up Cody's alley for sure. I know.
Because I'm a big fan of Alex Raymond and Alex Toth's work. Alex Raymond, wrote Rip Kirby, which I look at often. Another thing that I just love that I know everyone loves is Calvin and Hobbes. I mean, it's a great comic. It's a great comic strip. But more current stuff, I mean, I always like to go for the more, I don't know. Joelle Jones is probably one of more recent ones. I mean, Gabriel Piccolo, a lot of the DC YA young readers books. I love a lot of those, just because that's kind of the direction that I'm going with my career, is that I really like more of the YA kind of graphic novel feel. That's kind of what I wanted with Inkblot, except for an ongoing comic series. So that's more of the genres that I like to read nowadays. I mean, I still read like the older comics. Like we have a giant artist edition of Al Williamson's Star Wars back there. So it's like I go back. I go back in time with my comics.
That's really cool. Yeah, I do the same. I try to mix it up between current stuff and then any old stuff that I haven't read, old stuff that I have read a million times.
Yeah.
That kind of circulation, right? So
Definitely. It's what I think one of my favorite things in the Kubert School is that there's one class that a teacher would teach some of the comic history that would happen. So you would learn about all of these different amazing, like my grandpa level artists, which are insane because they can just draw right out of their hand and it's magic and it's amazing. So right. I like it more back then, I guess, than nowadays. I also like more traditional art. That's how Rusty and I draw Inkblot. We draw it traditionally. I think only the color is digitally, so it just has a different feel to me than digital art, but I still do that too, so I don't know.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, the book is Inkblot. It's out from Image Comics and it's on stands now. Go buy it. What are you waiting for? Just go buy it. Emma, thank you so much for joining us. It was an absolute delight.
Thank you for having me. It was very fun.
You let Rusty know that he's welcome anytime as well.
Of course.
In fact, maybe we can get the both of you back together when the arc ends.
We would love that. I think that would be great.
That would be wonderful. We're really looking forward to it. Looking forward to number 2. So everybody get out there, support your LCS.
Woo!
Nick, any final thoughts?
No, please, put it on your saver list. This is one that you've got to have, and I I'm ready for this. Like I'm pumped. I'm ready for it. So let's do it. Issue 2, come on.
That's all from us comic watchers for this week. Have a great weekend. Everybody stay safe. Wash your hands.
Oh yeah. Bye.